From the archives of the great library of Arathes, golden city of Elves, the wise scholars of Grey Sage present the unlikely and highly questionable accounts from those who were avowed witness. These are the suspenseful investigations of the human, Fraenk Neversleep, Arch-Preceptor of Blackroot. And now, the Neversleep Scrolls, Circle of the Mind Thief, written by Phillip Walton. The story continues. Part 2, Chapter 5. Carax the Cutthroat was so wide at the shoulders that he brushed against either side of the dungeon walls. He was escorted to the front and back by a nervous detail of guards who clutched the grips of their spiked maces in sweaty hands. He knew he could take all four of them if he had the mind to. Their maces were too awkward to swing in the tight confines of the black tunnels that ran beneath the dungeon. Even unarmed and freshly bruised, he could make quick and bloody work of this quartet with just his bare fists and the coiled violence in his arms. That dark thought was all the reassurance he needed, and knowing that made him feel powerful. Still, they proceeded on, the daft guards with no idea how close to death they were. Carax smiled slightly, making the crack in his lip open again. "Keep moving!" A rough hand shoved him from behind when he lagged too far from the front guards. "Sorry, my lord, 1,000 pardons." He demurred, trying to sound contrite. His swollen lip only throbbed with each word. Blood from a split on his brow trickled down into his right eye, and he blinked it away. Half a dozen other places on his body ached from the blows of their clubs. The beating had gone on longer than he expected, but then again for the bloody atrocity that he had done to that poor bastard in the yard, right in front of a shocked group of hardened criminals, he supposed that a show of force from the guards was probably warranted. The man had just looked at him, his face curious, like he might ask a question or possibly smile. That was all it took for Carax to decide it would be him. Funny how unpredictable life could be. The claustrophobic hallway suddenly opened into a sickeningly cavernous room. Even with the orange light of the guards' torches, an endless pit of black stretched downward in front of them. The only way forward was a curve of stairs that wrapped around the pit wall, ever downward into darkness. One side was a sheer stone wall, the other was the darkest air that Carax had ever seen. The only way forward was down. So they descended the stairs, and even more stairs still. The air temperature was considerably more chilly this deep underground. He briefly wondered what the others who had made this doomed trek had experienced as their new reality set in. Were they apologetic, depressed, ready to give up knowing they'd never escape? Pathetic. He cursed all of them to the ones above and below. They deserved their fate. He was not one of them. He would not die down here. After what seemed like an hour of stepping ever downward, the next stair was flat. Carax stumbled briefly but caught himself. But the guard behind was on him immediately. "Don't try anything stupid, you gats!" A blow from a club glanced off his shoulder without much effect. Fezat, the mean, wiry guard with a crooked nose that had been broken and reset improperly, grabbed him around the neck with a sinewy arm. As the man made a show of hauling him back to standing, he leaned close to hiss in Carax's ear. "Carve that Horvex as planned. Your betters will be watching," he said with calm menace. Then something hard slipped into his manacled hands. Carax's large fist closed over a shaft with a sharp point at one end. He knew immediately what it was without even looking. Cold metal, rough on the flat but ground into an uneven but serviceable edge. A thin handle was wound with a hempen cord, a crude dirk. Not nearly as good as the one he had crafted and later used to bleed, disassemble and disembowel that unfortunate soul in the yard, with his stupid friendly smile like he was about to greet Carax and ask how his day was. No. That weapon may have been a far cry from what you could get at a decent blacksmith, but for a prison dagger it was an instrument he had hated to part with. This new shiv could cut flesh if he pressed hard enough. It would have to do. Despite his seemingly dire situation, holding his new substandard shiv was a welcome feeling. He could have stabbed, slashed, and sliced into the soft parts between the leather and light chain that these guards wore. When brute force was required, you got the best brute, and that was him. He would soon do the dark work he did best and be back out in the sun again. Wasn't fortune fickle sometimes? "I expect there will be no more trouble out of you, Carax," the barrel-chested lead guard with the beard said from the front of the line. And if he did suddenly decide to stab this self-righteous prick in the face a few dozen times, would they dig an even deeper hole to throw him in? Carax smirked to himself. They marched him down a wider hall that was lined with darkened cells. Only a few glinting pairs of eyes peered at them from behind the bars. All looked skeletal and thin, with haunted expressions like the light itself was a terror to them. The detail stopped at the final cell on the block, and the guard, barrel-chest, pulled a key-ring off his belt and unlocked the cell. "Not every man knows the place where they'll die, prisoner. But now you do," he said, pulling open the door and making the hinges protest with a metallic squeal. He lifted his lantern. The thin light cast across a dank, filthy cell. The room was nearly empty, except for a filthy slop pail and a human shape curled up in the far corner against the wall. "And look! You've got a friend there." A rangy figure slept on a bedroll, covered in a tatty, moth-eaten blanket. He had long, greasy hair and dirty feet. Carax didn't trust it. The one he was told about was known to be 7 shades of clever. This was an obvious ruse. "There's only one bedroll, so you might have to snuggle up, you bugger." The porcine guard with the stringy moustache, whom Carax had begun to think of as the peccary, added, snickering at the joke he probably repeated to every prisoner who was brought down here. "So, who is he?" Carax tried to sound concerned as Fezat unlocked his manacles. "You ain't heard?" the peccary snorted. "That one murdered an elf. Not just that, but a brave hero of Arathes, divines bless him. Recently returned home from the war, and he was just trying to set himself up with a bakery." The fat guard tapped his heart 3 times and circled it, a religious gesture so old most weren't even aware of its meaning. "I don't like no elf killer," Carax said darkly. The barrel chest gave him a look. Finally, something on which they both agreed. "Well, get on with it." Fezat shoved him inside the cell. "Try and get along, or don't. Neither of you will ever see daylight again," the barrel chest said absently as he adjusted the shutter on the lamp. Carax caught Fezat glaring hatefully at him as the light swept by the man's face. The big prisoner had a sudden, strong desire to hurt that man if he ever had a clear chance. The guards left as a group, becoming silhouettes moving in a circle of torchlight down the hallway. In less than a minute, he was surrounded by total, unyielding darkness. Without his eyes to rely on, Carax's ears came to life. Water dripped from everywhere, skittering feet of rodents, the echoing sound of bodies moving in the darkness. Coughs, sniffles, breathing, everything felt very close. He heard a fast movement across the room and could imagine the other man was up on his feet. He had to reason the other man was probably armed with some makeshift blade as well. Carax gripped the shiv in his hand, quietly ready to perforate anything that came within reach. "What's your name, giant?" A disembodied voice came from nowhere. Carax didn't reply. Giving away his position could be very unwise. "I was wondering how long it would take to get someone down here. You certainly do impress. I suppose I should be flattered. My assumption is correct that you are here to kill me." This time the voice sounded like it was behind him. Maybe he could find the source of the voice if it kept talking. "I come to gift the man called Neversleep his eternal rest," Carax replied. "Clever! I like that. It is indeed poetic, but you had to get sent to the black cells to do it. That's taking a big risk." The voice came again from another direction. "Better than dying in here an old man, or worse, an elf-killing coward." "So just your freedom, that's the whole offer?" The voice teased again, sounding low to the ground. "A bit of gold, too," Carax replied and moved into a crouch. His hands felt out the blackness, kneading it like some grotesque shadow-dwelling cat. "Oh, of course, the gold. Never work for free, I say, not if you're a tradesman. What else?" "And a small house in the upper city, just above a butcher shop. I'm too old to switch careers at this point," Carax continued. The hidden man sucked his teeth with a sharp intake of breath. "See, now that's where the wheels fall off the liar's cart, big fella. The other parts I might allow you. But when your partners promise that house, the weight of the sloss breaks it, I'm afraid." The voice sounded apologetic. "Sorry to tell you this, but they're going to leave you to rot down here regardless. You're a big, scary killer, after all." "Fain take you!" Carax grunted and slashed with the blade, only clipping moist, rough-hewn granite. He was hoping for a bright spark from the metal on the stone, but the wall was so damp it barely even threw back a sound. "Would you care to hear my side of it?" the other one asked. "Stand still and bleed!" Carax swept his open hand in a wide arc, feeling for the voice. All he needed was a body to plunge the knife into and it would be done. More of a loyalist, not a speculator. I get it, the voice chided. Neversleep? Where are you, Neversleep? You can't avoid me forever. Of course you're right, but one last thing before you unburden me of my precious innards. Who paid you to kill me? Some bereaved elves require your death to regain their honour, Carax said, finally starting to hone in on the voice's origin. Indeed. As the elven sages have written, verity is the great liberator. Not in your case, unfortunately. No, you'll die down here. Carax could feel the voice very close. Didn't matter what he was saying. A cornered man would say anything to keep drawing breath, especially if it was lies or things that made him doubt the bargain he struck with his shadowy benefactors. His foot hit something close to the ground, and he realized the man was probably crouched low to avoid him. Carax reacted on pure reflex, falling on the body. The shiv pumped and stabbed the hard torso, adding fresh holes to the old blanket, and digging hard chunks of flesh from the cold body. In a moment, Carax realized he was stabbing a dead man, one that had been dead for some time. He recoiled with a horrified gasp and clambered to his feet. A bright light bloomed suddenly, making Carax shield his eyes. He dropped the gore-covered shiv, his hands dripping with putrescent blood. Someone was standing on the other side of the bars, holding a glowing glass orb. It was the man he was stumbling stupidly in the dark for, the one he was supposed to kill. Somehow the human called Neversleep was there, watching him from just outside the cell. "Neversleep!" Carax exclaimed. "How did you—" Looks like you done for old Jasper there," Fraenk said. "Oh, don't worry, he was already dead. And honestly, he probably deserved it. He had a nasty habit of cutting up poor brothel girls." "How did you get out of the cell?" Carax asked, bewildered. "I've got my own comfortable room set up down the hall." Fraenk pointed off down another dark corridor. "Well, it's not exactly comfortable, but at least I don't have the dungeon rats trying to gnaw off my toes." "But they locked you up. I seen the partisans haul you in here." "And they made a big show of it too, didn't they?" Frank's eyes sparkled mischievously. "I arranged to get myself stuck down in the black cells. After all, it is one of the safest places in the city, so long as they don't send a hulking killer down after you." Carax's brow furrowed. Try as he might, his brain was better equipped at understanding simple things like stabbing, slashing, and every manner of laceration. He was not good at piecing together multi-layered schemes and counter-schemes, let alone where he fit into them. "But you killed an elf, a son of House Greenbriar," he stated, incredulous. "And as you said, the requirements of honour demand my death. I know elves can hold a grudge for hundreds of years, but I didn't think their revenge would take this long." Fraenk stretched. "I don't know who should be more offended, me or Bas Greenbriar." Fraenk sized the big man up appraisingly, then nodded. "I take that back. You're certainly impressive as far as paid cutthroats go, and you risked the forever darkness of the black cells just to do it. It's commendable. I'll have to let them know you did try." "But I'm supposed to kill you?" Carax sounded disappointed. "Sorry, big fella. I really must be going. A month in the dungeon can really set you behind on one's duties." Fraenk started to turn when a bloody fist rammed through the bars. The blade of the shiv lashed wildly in the air. "Die! By the powers, Neversleep, die!" Carax thrashed like a snared hellcat, but his reach was just shy of where Fraenk was standing. Fraenk shook his head sadly. "See, now that's the same kind of anger that got me in trouble. You'll want to get control of that, or it could really get you in a bad place." From up the hallway came the sounds of a commotion. Some other man screaming and thrashing like he was being tortured. Carax withdrew back into his cell, watching. The torchlight coming down the hallway revealed 4 guards, dragging a new prisoner towards them. As they got closer, Carax recognized Fezat with his bent nose. He was stripped of his armor and wore only white woolen underwear that he had already soiled. He gibbered and howled with incoherent terror. "You'll be pleased to know we did get you a fresh cellmate. I figured you had something in common, with you both working for the Greenbriars." The guards hauled their former co-worker up and tossed him in the cell with Carax. "See you in a month. If you're behaving yourself, we'll see about getting you some time in the sunshine again." Fraenk turned and strode away, back to the stairs and back to the city that awaited him. he had a nagging feeling that his troubles had only begun. This vendetta with the Greenbriars was far from over. Thank you for listening. Tune in next week for another exciting episode. And remember, the learned scholars of Greysage caution you that the veracity of these events remains unproven. Now go safe in the light of the powers, until our hands clasp again.